Okay, good morning and welcome to all of you. Uh, and it's again a pleasure to be part of this very exciting meeting. Waking up on a Sunday morning and coming for a lecture on incidence and prevalence at 9 a.m. calls for a lot of commitment. So I salute all of you who have turned up to listen to this lecture. So today we're going to talk about incidence, prevalence, odds, risks, and odds ratios and risk ratios. The veritable sort of bread and butter of research methodology. So the overview of this talk is going to be, we're going to talk about incidence proportion, which is also known as risk, incidence rate, what do we mean by point prevalence and period prevalence. Then we'll go on to odds, risks, odds ratios, risk ratios, and what do we mean by risk difference and number needed to treat. So there's a lot of ground to cover today. Hope to do it in about 45 minutes, leaving 15 minutes for questions and answers. So let's start with incidence proportion, which is also known as risk. So what is incidence proportion or risk? Among an initially disease-free population, that means you're starting off with people who don't have the disease, the proportion of new cases that develop during a specified period of time, because you have to give some time for new cases to develop, that is known as incidence proportion or risk. So the word incidence proportion is used more commonly in public health. You'll hear a lot of it being talked about in the context of COVID-19, for instance. And the word risk is used more often in clinical studies. So what is the formula? So incidence is the number of new cases in a specified period, that's in the numerator, and the size of the population at the start of that period is in the denominator. Let's take an example. For example, of 100 COVID-19 positive patients followed over 28 days, 30 developed severe pneumonia. So our disease of interest is severe pneumonia. Disease of interest is not COVID-19, okay? So everybody to begin with had no severe pneumonia. They just had COVID-19. And over 28 days, 30 developed severe pneumonia. So the incidence, or in other words, the risk of severe pneumonia is 30 by 100 or 3%. Sorry, 30 by 100 or 30%. Okay, so what is incidence rate? Among an initially disease-free population, the number of new cases that develop, so far it is the same, right? But here lies the difference. It is expressed as a fraction of person time each person was observed, totaled for all persons. So that means different persons may have been observed for different lengths of time. You are totaling up all those lengths of time of each individual person, and that total becomes your denominator. So there is a time factor now in the denominator. And how is this time of each person determined? With each person being followed up until one of the following things happens. Either death or loss to follow up, or the study period comes to an end, or the disease occurs. So once the disease has occurred, then the person is no longer followed up. And this is if it is a one-time disease. That means you're interested only in the first occurrence of the disease. When a disease occurs multiple times, that's handled a little differently. So let's look at the formula. So incidence rate, or IR, is the number of new cases during a specified period. So the numerator is the same as that for incidence proportion, but the denominator is the time each person was observed totaled for all persons. So for example, if 5 persons were followed up for an average of 5 years each, so that means together they would have contributed 25 person years, 5 persons into 5 years, so 25 person years. And if 3 of them develop coronary artery disease over this cumulative time period, then the incidence rate becomes 3 cases per 25 person years of observation. So remember, this is not a proportion in the sense that, unlike incidence proportion, where the numerator and the denominator were both number of persons. Here the numerator is number of persons, 3 persons, but the denominator is 25 person years of observation. What is point prevalence? Point prevalence is among a population, the proportion of pre-existing cases. Now note the difference. So these are not new cases. The proportion of pre-existing cases at a particular point in time is called point prevalence. Into this definition, you could, if you want, add pre-existing and new cases, and we'll see how in period prevalence you have and new cases. But for all practical purposes, if you're looking at a particular point in time, point prevalence is likely to capture only pre-existing cases, because it's highly unlikely that in a point in time you will suddenly get a new case which by coincidence just happens to occur at that point in time. So for all practical purposes, point prevalence is picking up only pre-existing cases of a disease at a particular point in time. So point prevalence is all pre-existing cases at a time point divided by the total population that you surveyed at that time point. So for example, if of 1,000 persons evaluated on the 1st of July 2020, if 50 were diabetics, then the point prevalence is 50 by 1,000, or in other words, 5%. So these are all pre-existing cases that were already there when you evaluated these 1,000 people on the 1st of July 2020. Okay, so what is period prevalence? Period prevalence is among a population, and note that we are not looking for a previously disease-free population. So if incidence was amongst those who were previously non-diseased, the new cases occurring. In period prevalence, you can't be having a population who is previously non-diseased, because you're interested in those who are pre-existing disease. So among a population, the proportion of pre-existing and new cases that are found during a specified period of time is known as period prevalence. So period prevalence is all pre-existing and new cases during a time period. So now there is a time period. It's not over just a time point divided by the population during the same period. A lot of people take it as a population at the beginning of the period. Some people also take population in the middle of that period, as representing the average population in that period. For example, in a survey conducted over a 12-month period on 1,000 persons to begin with, 50 were already diabetic to begin with, and 5 more new cases were detected during that period because of active surveillance. So the period prevalence becomes 50 who are already there to begin with, plus the 5 new, that is 55, divided by 1,000, that makes it 55 by 1,000, that's 5.5%. So this is the difference between incidence proportion, incidence rate, point prevalence, and period prevalence. And we will take an actual example and try to calculate it out to make it simpler for you. So we're going to do some calculations here. So on the vertical axis, you will see are 10 patients. So patient number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. On the horizontal axis, you have time. So we are going to start on the 1st January 2020 and go on for 6 months until the 30th of June 2020. And I have marked out the first date of each month. So 1st Feb to 1st June are marked out here. So each horizontal line depicts the experience of observation of one patient. A green line means that the patient never became diseased. Disease did not happen in that patient. The whole period of observation is completed without disease. If the green line goes all the way from the beginning to the end, that means the patient was available for follow-up for the full 6 months period for observation. If the green line stops somewhere midway, like in patient number 2, it would mean that the patient was no longer available for observation, was lost to follow-up beyond a certain time period. When when green turns to red, it means initially the patient was non-diseased, but became diseased somewhere midway. And we are assuming it's a chronic disease, so the patient continues to remain diseased. If the patient starts off as being red, like in patient number 4, it means the patient was diseased even to begin with. If there is a blue cross at the end of the line, it means the patient died during the observation period. So we have 10 patients who have varying events happening during the period of observation. Okay, now let's proceed. Let us start off with first the incidence proportion, and I hope all of you can see the incidence proportion. It's at the top of the slide. The incidence proportion of the risk, and we are going to look at a period from the 1st of March 2020 to the 30th of June 2020. Okay, now on the right hand side, I have actually written the total number of months that each subject was followed up. So as you can see, subject number 1 was for 6 months, subject 2 was for 3 months, subject 3 was for 5 months, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's look at the period 1st March to 30th June. So who are the people who will form the denominator for calculating incidence? So it has to be only those people who were non-diseased to begin with. So subject number 3, 4, 7, and 8 get excluded from the denominator of incidence because they were already diseased to begin with. So we are not going to include them in the denominator. So they are neither in the denominator nor in the numerator. So we only have subjects 1, 2, 5, 6, 9, and 10 who are going to be in the denominator. So 6 patients. Of them, subjects 1 and 2 did not develop the disease during this period of observation between these two vertical purple dashed lines that I've put up. The ones who developed the disease were 5, 6, 9, and 10. So 4 developed the disease out of the 6 during this period of observation. So therefore the risk or the incidence proportion from 1st March 2020 to 30th June 2020 was 4/6. Let's move ahead. What was the incidence rate from the 1st of January 2020 to the 30th of June 2020? Okay, so 1st of January to the 30th of June. So again, we are interested only in those who were non-diseased to begin with. So that means you have subjects 1, 2, 3. We are not going to take 4. We will take 5 and 6. We will not take 7 and 8. And we will take 9 and 10. Now, incidence rate is the cumulative duration for which they were all followed up. So we need to add up these months for which these subjects were followed up. So effectively, we will have to add up 6 months plus 3 months plus 5 months. That is to account for patients 1, 2, and 3. Then 6 months and 4 months for patients 5 and 6. And 6 months and 6 months for patients 9 and 10. So I marked them all in blue, the ones that are under consideration. So that totals up to a total of 36 months. So these are known as 36 person months. And of those 36, in that 36 person months period of observation, cumulative period, you had 5 persons who developed the disease. And who were these 5 persons? It was patient number 3, patient number 5, patient number 6, patient number 9, and patient number 10. So there were 5 cases of this disease that occurred in 36 person months of observation. So that makes it an incidence rate of 5/36. Okay, what was the point prevalence on the 1st of April 2020? So on the 1st of April 2020, of the 10 patients, 1 had already died. That is patient number 7. See the blue cross that died somewhere in the beginning of March. So that person will no longer be under consideration for point prevalence on 1st of April. So therefore you have 9 patients left, and since for prevalence you are interested both in pre-existing disease and in new cases. So on the 1st of April, patients 3, 4, 6, and 8, 4 patients were already having the disease pre-existing. So it is 4 by 9 is the point prevalence on the 1st of April. Now let's look at period prevalence by the vertical pink lines from the 1st of January 2020 to the 1st of May 2020. So on the 1st of January 2020, all 10 patients were available for observation. They were followed up till the 1st of May. So if you take both the ones that had pre-existing disease, that means patients 4, 7, and 8, and those who developed new disease, that is patients 3 and 6, you end up getting a period prevalence of 6 by 10. So I hope this graph is able to convey to you the difference between these 4 parameters, which are measures of how much disease burden is there in your population. Okay, we now move on and we talk a little bit about types of variables, because from there we move on to odds and risks. So variables are essentially of 2 types, which are mentioned in blue here: categorical and numerical. Categorical variables express membership of a category, and very often categorical variables are binary or binomial in the sense that the variable has an option of 2 categories to choose from. And here are some examples. So sex is a binary categorical variable because there are 2 options, male versus female. Survival status is binary, alive versus dead. Recovery status is binary, recovered versus not recovered. And even grouping variables are often binary. So in a 2-armed trial, intervention arm versus control arm, so that's binary. There are 2 options to choose from. A 2-group cohort study, exposed versus non-exposed. So the grouping variable here is binary. 2-group case control study in which you are comparing diseased versus non-diseased, again binary. Whereas numerical expresses a number, example, blood pressure, age, height, weight, and so on. And of course, all numerical variables can also be converted into binary variables. That's called binarizing a numerical variable by simply putting a cutoff value. Whoever is above a certain cutoff value becomes positive, below a certain cutoff value becomes negative, and so on. So the grouping variables are often known as independent variables. And the variable that we are comparing between the 2 groups is often known as the outcome variable or the dependent variable. So how to understand binomial variables, odds and risks? The only way you can understand odds and risk is by making regular visits to Pizza Hut and eating a lot of pizzas. That's how I learned about odds and risks. So here is a pizza and somebody is taking out a slice of the pizza. And all of odds and risks is about the relationship between the slice of the pizza and the rest of the pizza. So here we go. So on top, you have a population of patients, say 100 patients. A certain proportion of them develop the event of interest, which is the yellow slice of the pizza. The blue is the remainder of the pizza. So some people have the event of interest. So the slice of the pizza divided by the rest of the pizza is called odds. Whereas the slice of the pizza divided by the whole pizza is called risk. Let's take a numerical example. So imagine you have 100 patients who are followed up for say 1 year. 30 of them died. 70 were still living at the end of 1 year out of 100. So what are the odds of dying? The odds of dying are 30 divided by 70. The slice of the pizza by the rest of the pizza, which is 3 by 7, or in other words, 43% is the, or 0.43, you know, depends. You can either express it as percent or as decimal. So 0.43, or in other words, 43%, you're simply shifting the decimal place 2 sides to the right, are the odds of dying in this group. What is the risk of dying? The risk of dying is 30 divided by the full 100. So that's 3 by 10 or 30%. So 30% is the risk of dying. Note that in any population, the risk will always be less than the odds. Like 30% is less than 43%. Why is that so? Because the numerator is the same in both odds and risk, but the denominator in odds is always smaller than the denominator in risk. Therefore, odds will always be more than the risk. Okay, now let us compare binomial data between two groups. So you have group 1 and group 2. In both of them, there is the same binomial binary variable that we are comparing. So supposing you're looking at odds in one group and dividing it by the odds in the other group, that is known as odds ratio. So the odds in one group divided by the odds in the other group is called odds ratio. Remember that an odds ratio is a ratio of two ratios because the odds by itself is a ratio. If it is the risk in one group divided by the risk in the other group, it is called risk ratio. And if it is the risk in one group minus the risk in the other group, it is called risk difference. So risk ratio is a ratio again of two ratios because risk is also a ratio. And risk difference is the arithmetic difference between two risks. Now, to familiarize ourselves with odds and risk, let's play around with the numbers a little bit. So let's change the size of the slices and see what happens, what effect it has on odds and risks. So here is a population. I would request you to focus attention on the top of the slide. So a population, the blue slice represents those who died and the rest orange is those who survived. So in the top example, 5 people died out of 100. So the odds would be 5 divided by 25, which is equal to 0.052. The risk is 5 divided by the full 100, which is 0.05, or in other words, 5%. Whereas the odds was 5.2%. Okay, so you can see that there's almost the same, but odds is slightly more. Let's increase the size of the slice and make it 40 instead of 5. So now odds is 40 by 60, which is 0.66, basically 2/3. Whereas the risk is 40 by 100 or 0.4. Let's increase the slice even further, make it 60. So it becomes, odds becomes 60 by 40, which is 1.5. The risk is 60 by 100, which is 0.6. Let's make the slice 95. That means 95 out of 100 died. So the odds becomes 95 by 5, which is 19. The risk is 95 by 100, which is 0.95. So you may have observed a few things. One is, if the number of events occurring are very small, as in the top example, only 5 people died, then the odds approximates the risk. The two are almost the same, right? As the number of events increases, the odds keeps diverging from the risk. So the gap between odds and risk becomes huge when the number of events becomes large, which is exemplified by the bottom, where there is a massive difference between 19 and 0.95. Okay. The third observation is that odds is capable of crossing the value of 1 and going up to plus infinity if you want. So there is no limit to odds. Whereas risk is capped by the number 1. It can't cross the value of 1 because the numerator can never become more than the denominator in the risk. Whereas the numerator can become much more than the denominator in odds because you're looking at the events divided by the non-events. So these are some important differences between odds and risks. Okay. Now let's look at some conventions regarding the numerator and denominator. Now, in randomized control trials, in the numerator, you have either the odds or the risk of outcome in the intervention group in the numerator divided by odds or risk of the outcome in the control group in the denominator. If you're talking about odds, it becomes an odds ratio. If you're talking about risk, it becomes a risk ratio. But always in the numerator, you will have the intervention group. And the outcome in a randomized control trial, by convention, is usually something bad or undesirable. example, death or sequelae or non-recovery, something like that, seldom is the outcome by convention a good outcome. You never talk of the risk of passing of an exam or the risk of surviving. It always is, by default denotes a bad outcome. In a cohort study, in the numerator, you have the odds or the risk of disease amongst the exposed in the numerator, and the odds of the risk of disease in the unexposed in the denominator. And the disease is, of course, always bad or something undesirable. So exposed is in the numerator. In a case control study, the odds of exposure in the diseased group or the cases is in the numerator, and the odds of exposure in the non-diseased group controls is in the denominator. We don't talk about risk in case control study. It's only odds, and I will be dealing with that in a short while. And again, exposure by convention is usually something bad or undesirable, like smoking, alcohol, infection, and so on. By convention, you don't talk about exposure to something that is desirable. Okay, now let's see how we interpret the results of a randomized controlled trial. So the blue part is going to denote subjects who develop the outcome, the undesirable outcome on follow-up, and the yellow is subjects who do not develop the outcome on follow-up. So basically, when we're talking about the risk ratio in a randomized controlled trial, in the numerator, you have the intervention group. Denominator, you have the control group. So it is the blue divided by the total number in the numerator upon the blue divided by the total number in the denominator who forms the risk ratio. Whereas for odds ratio, it is the slice of the pizza divided by the rest of the pizza amongst the intervention arm, the whole thing divided by the slice of the pizza by the rest of the pizza in the control arm, in the denominator. That is the odds ratio in a randomized control trial. So if the intervention is beneficial, both the risk ratio and the odds ratio will be less than the value of 1, because your risk or odds in the intervention group would be less than the risk or odds in the control group. And if the intervention is harmful, both the risk and the odds ratio will be greater than 1. And if it's neither beneficial nor harmful, it will be equal to 1. In a cohort study, now the blue is going to represent the subjects who develop the disease on follow-up. Yellow, those who don't develop the disease. So the numerator is the exposed group, denominator is the non-exposed. So the risk amongst the exposed divided by the risk of the disease amongst the non-exposed would mean risk ratio. And the odds of the disease amongst the exposed divided by the odds of the disease amongst the non-exposed would form the odds ratio in a cohort study. So if a factor increases the risk of the disease, both the risk ratio and odds ratio will be greater than 1, because the numerator is the exposed. So if the disease is more amongst the exposed, if the factor increases the risk of the disease, risk ratio, odds ratio will be more than 1. If the factor decreases the risk of the disease, they will both be less than 1. And again, if the factor neither increases nor decreases the risk, both risk and odds ratios will be equal to 1. What happens in a case control study? Blue would be subjects who had been exposed to the suspected risk factor before the onset of the disease. Yellow, subjects who had not been exposed to the risk factor before the onset of the disease. So you deal only with odds ratios in a case control study. Numerator are the diseased group, that means cases. Denominator are the non-disease, that is controls. Blue is those who had the risk factor in the past. So the slice of the pizza, those who are exposed divided by those who are not exposed in the past amongst the cases, divided by the exposed divided by non-exposed amongst the controls. That gives you the odds ratio. So if a factor increases the risk of the disease, the odds ratio will be greater than 1. If a factor decreases the risk of the disease, odds ratio will be less than 1. And if it neither increases nor decreases, as expected, the odds ratio would be equal to 1. Okay, so now let's take these two group comparisons and again play around with the slices of the pizza to see its effect. So you have group 1 and group 2, and we are going to calculate both the odds ratio and the risk ratio. So here you have the top group 1, in which the number of people who died was 5 by 100 total sample size. In group 2, again, you have total of 100 people and you have 10 who died. So the odds ratio would be 5 by 95 coming from group 1, the whole thing divided by 10 by 90 coming from group 2. 10 by 90 coming from group 2, and that gives an odds ratio of 0.47 if you calculate it out. Okay, so it's the slice of the pizza divided by the rest of the pizza for both the groups, whereas the risk ratio would be 5% in group 1 because it is basically 5 by 100. So I've conveniently taken 100 as a denominator to make it easy to calculate percentages. So 5% divided by 10% in group 2. So that is 0.5. Note that there is a slight difference between the odds ratio and the risk ratio. Now let's increase the slices of these pizzas. So in group 1, in the second example, I increased the slice to 15 from 5, means 3 times. And in group 2, it increases from 10 to 30, against a 3 times increase in the slice. So what happens to the odds ratio? The odds ratio is now 15 by 85. 85 is the rest of the pizza. The whole thing divided by 30 divided by 70, because 70 now is the rest of the pizza in group 2. And that works out to be 0.41. Whereas the risk ratio is 15% by 30% and it remains 0.5. So we already started noticing something interesting happening, that if the slices of the pizza in the two group increase proportionately, the risk ratio does not change, but the odds ratio does. It doesn't remain the same. So from 0.47, it's become 0.41 now. Now let's increase the slices even more. So in group 1, the number of people who died is now become 85 out of 100. Group 2, 70 are dying out of 100. So what will be the odds ratio? The odds ratio will be 85 by 15. The whole thing divided by 70 by 30. Note that these numbers are basically the reverse of what they were in the previous examples. So previously it was 15 by 85, now I made it 85 by 15. Previously it was 30 by 70, now I made it 70 by 30. The odds ratio is now 2.43. 2.43. And the interesting part is this 2.43 is the reciprocal of 0.41. So it's equal to 1 by 41. So that means when these numbers get reversed, the odds ratio simply becomes a reciprocal. 2.43 is equal to 1 upon 0.41. Now let's see what happens to risk ratio. Risk ratio would be 85% divided by 70%, which is 1.21. But 1.21 is not the reciprocal of 1 by 0.5 in the previous example. So odds ratio has this interesting property that if these numbers just get reversed, the slices get reversed, the odds ratio becomes an exact mathematical reciprocal. The same does not have with risk ratio. And I'm going to show how this property makes odds ratio suitable in case control studies, but risk ratio therefore is not suitable in case control studies. We'll come to that in a little while. Let's talk about the last example at the bottom. So 95 deaths in group 1, 90 deaths in group 2. So 95 by 5 odds in group 1 divided by 90 by 10 odds in group 2 is 2.11 odds ratio, whereas the risk ratio is 95% divided by 90%, so the risk ratio is 1.05. Now there are a few interesting things that we have observed. One is that if the events are less in number in both the groups, that means the top example, very few events happening, your odds ratio is fairly close to the risk ratio, 0.47 versus 0.5. But as the events become more and more common, that means you take the second example and then the third example, the odds ratio diverges from the risk ratio. The odds ratio and the risk ratio are no longer very close to each other. So if events are less, you could use either odds ratio or risk ratio. Okay. The second thing that you notice, the odds ratio is always further away from the value of 1 compared to its corresponding risk ratio. Let us see how. Let's take the top example. Risk ratio is 0.5, odds ratio 0.47. So 0.47 is further away from the value of 1. So remember, 1 is your null value where there is no difference between the two groups. So odds ratio is further away from the value of 1. Let's look at it on the higher side of 1. Let's take the bottom example. Odds ratio is 2.11. The corresponding risk ratio is 1.05. Again, odds ratio is further away from the value of 1 on the higher side compared to the risk ratio. This means that the odds ratio always tends to inflate the size of the effect compared to its corresponding risk ratio. It will always exaggerate the effect compared to its corresponding risk ratio. So these are a few interesting things that we have learned about the odds ratio and the risk ratio. Now this question that always comes up in every research methodology workshop: why do we use only odds ratios but not risk ratios in case control studies? And that's what I'm going to try and demonstrate to you. Now let's take a case control study, an observational study. So the columns are those who developed the disease and those who did not develop the disease. And the rows are exposed to risk factor, unexposed to risk factor. And they have been populated as A, B, C, and D. So the total number of people who developed the disease was A plus B. The total number of people who did not develop the disease is C plus D. So the odds of exposure amongst the disease, the odds of getting exposed amongst those who are diseased is A by B. A by B. The slice divided by the rest. The odds of exposure amongst the non-diseased, the right column, is C by D. Again, the slice by the rest. So the odds ratio of exposure status by disease status is A by B, the whole thing divided by C by D. And if you turn it around, it becomes AD by BC. So it's a cross product. A multiplied by D, the whole thing divided by BC. Okay. Now let's interchange the rows and the columns. Let's look at the same data in the reverse direction. Now I've put exposed to risk factor and unexposed to risk factor at the top, at the column headings, and made developed disease, did not develop disease as the rows. The A's and B's move to the respective location, A, B, C, D. So this becomes A. Now the B is here, the C is here, and the D is here. So now the exposed to risk factors are the A plus C, unexposed to risk factors are the B plus D. Okay? Okay, now let's calculate the odds again. So now the odds of developing the disease amongst the exposed. Remember the previous example was odds of having exposure amongst the disease. Now we're looking at odds of developing the disease amongst the exposed is A by C. So amongst the exposed, what is the odds of developing the disease? This now becomes your slice of the pizza, and the C becomes the rest of the pizza. So it's A divided by C. Odds of the disease amongst the non-exposed, the right side, is B by D. So the odds ratio of disease status by exposure status. Previously we were looking at exposure status by disease status. Now it's disease status by exposure status is A by C, the whole thing divided by B by D, which is again AD by BC, which is exactly the same as the odds ratio of the exposure status by the disease status. So that means whether you look at, regardless of which direction the data is looked at, odds of developing the disease amongst the exposed or odds of having been exposed amongst the diseased, the odds ratio remains unchanged. So let's take an example from a case control study. Suppose our source population is 1,100 subjects. We are looking at patients with chronic renal failure and no chronic renal failure. And our risk factor is diabetes versus no diabetes. So chronic renal failure, there are 80 patients, 30 diabetic and 50 non-diabetic. No chronic renal failure, there are 1,020 patients. There are 70 diabetics and 950 non-diabetics. Now let's calculate. So the odds of being exposed amongst the diseased is, so amongst the disease, that means amongst the CRF patients, odds of being exposed is 30 divided by the rest, that is 50. So 30 by 50. The odds of exposure amongst the non-diseased, that means no CRF, odds of exposure is 70 by 950. when you calculate the odds ratio, it works out to be 7.9. So just remember this figure, 7.9 is the odds ratio. Now let's look at it the other way around. What is the odds of disease amongst the exposed? So now we are looking at the exposed, so the diabetes. What is the odds of developing the disease amongst the exposed? So amongst the diabetics, it is 30 by 70. Odds of developing the disease amongst the exposed. So 30 divided by 70. Odds of developing the disease amongst the non-exposed. The non-exposed are non-diabetics. So 50 by 950. So the odds ratio now is 30 by 70 divided by 50 by 950, which is again 7.9. So that's brilliant. In a case control study, there is no problem. You can look at, because you're looking at the data in the reverse direction, it doesn't matter now. You can use odds ratio because both forward and reverse would have given the same result. But what if we had calculated risk ratio? Look at this, the source population 1100, same data set, okay? Except that I've added one column to the right, giving the total number of diabetics being 1000, non-diabetics being, diabetics being 100, non-diabetics being 1000, so total population is 1100. Otherwise, the data set is the same. Now let's see, risk of exposure amongst the diseased is, so the diseased are CRF. What is the risk of exposure? It is 30 by 80, the full population, the whole pizza, 30 by the whole pizza, 30 by 80. Risk of exposure amongst the non-diseased, no CRF. So 70 by 1020. So the whole pizza. So the risk ratio is 30 by 80, the whole thing divided by 70 by 1020, that is 5.46. Okay. But now let's look at the results in the reverse direction. What is the risk of the disease amongst the exposed? So amongst the exposed, that is diabetics. So getting the diseased is 30 by 100, the whole pizza, 30 by 100. Risk of disease amongst the non-exposed, that means the non-diabetics, is 50 by 1000. That risk ratio works out to be 6, which is not the same as 5.46. So risk ratio changes depending on which direction you're looking at the data. When you're looking from exposure to disease versus disease to exposure, the risk ratio is not the same. Therefore, risk ratio cannot be used in a case control study. Only odds ratio can be used. Now let's talk a little bit about risk difference and this concept of number needed to treat. We have talked so far about risk ratios and odds ratios. Let's talk about risk difference. So imagine a randomized control trial in which the outcome, say death, occurs in 30% in the intervention arm and 45% in the control arm. That is the same as saying that survival would be 70% in the intervention arm and 55% in the control arm. That's right. Because if 45 are dying, then 55 are surviving. If 30 are dying, then 70 are surviving per 100. Now here is a table and we will go over it row by row. So don't look at the bottom row right now. Let's look at the top row only. So now in this randomized control trial, in each group, that means in both intervention and control group, if you treat one patient each, one intervention, one control, then what is going to happen? In the intervention group, you will save 0.7 patients because 70% people are surviving in the intervention group. So that means out of one patient, 0.7 would survive. In the control group, you would save 0.55 patients. So your net saving would be 0.7 minus 0.55 patients. So you would end up saving 0.15 of a patient, which is basically 15% of a patient. You can't save a full patient. If you're treating only one patient in both the groups, you end up saving only 15% of a patient. If you had treated two patients in both arms, 1.4 patients would have survived in the intervention group. 1.1 patients would have survived in the control group. Your net saving would have been 30% of a patient, not a full patient, only 30% of a patient. If you had gone on to treat 6 patients in both groups, you would have ended up saving 90% of a patient. But if you had treated 7 patients in both the arms, you would have saved 1.05 of a patient. That means at least one extra patient would have survived in the intervention group. This is the meaning of number needed to treat. What is the number you need to treat in both the arms in order to get at least one full extra human being surviving in your intervention arm? So 1 upon the risk difference, look at the bottom of the slide, 1 upon the risk difference is 1 divided by, what was the risk difference? It was 45% minus 30%. That means 1 by 15%, which is basically 100 by 15, which is 6.67. And you round it off to the higher number 7. That is the number needed to treat. So the number needed to treat is equal to 1 upon the risk difference. A number needed to treat tells you how many patients you need to treat in both the intervention and the control arm in order to save one extra patient in the intervention arm. Now, this terminology starts getting confusing after some time, and it's always good to go back and see how do you express common terminology in plain English. Now let's look at this data set. You have an intervention group and a control group. You have dead and survived. Intervention arm, there are 100 patients, of which 10 died and 90 survived, imagine. And in the control arm, imagine there are 200 patients, of which 80 died and 120 survived. So let's go over all the things that we have talked about today and try to express it in plain English. So the risk in the intervention arm, by now all of you would be familiar with this, would be 10 divided by 100. The slice of the pizza by the whole pizza. 10 divided by 100, which is 10% or 0.1. The risk in the control arm would be 80 divided by 200. The slice divided by the whole pizza, that is 40%, or in other words, 0.4. Therefore, the risk ratio, or RR, would be 10% divided by 40%. That means 0.1 by 0.4, which is the same thing as 0.25, which can also be expressed as 25%. So we can, instead of saying risk ratio of 0.25, we could easily say risk ratio of 25%. What does it mean in plain English? It means that the risk of dying, when we say risk ratio is 0.25, it means the risk of dying in the intervention arm is only 25% of the risk of dying in the control arm. Or even simpler, for every 100 deaths in the control arm, there will be only 25 deaths in the intervention arm. That's what it means in plain English. So when someone tells you RR is 0.25, it means for every 100 deaths in the control arm, there will be only 25 deaths in the intervention arm. Okay. What is RRR? Means relative risk reduction. This is a new term I'm introducing. Relative risk reduction is 1 minus the RR, which in this case is 1 minus 0.25, or in other words, 100% minus 25%, which can be expressed as 75%, which can also be called 0.75. It's all the same thing. What you're saying in plain English is that the risk of dying in the intervention arm has been brought down by 75% compared to the control arm. That is relative risk reduction. So the relative risk itself was only 25%, which means the relative risk reduction is 75%. It all means exactly the same thing, being said in different ways. Okay, same data set, intervention and control, same numbers. Now let's talk about odds. So the odds in the intervention arm is 10 by 90, the slice of the pizza by the rest of the pizza, which is 0.11. 0.11 is same thing as 11%. So in simple English, it means the chances of dying are 11% of the chances of not dying. Odds in the control arm is 80 by 120, which is 0.66, or in other words, 66%. What are we saying? The chances of dying are 66% of the chances of not dying. The odds ratio is 0.11, divided by 0.66, which is the same thing as 11% by 66%, which works out to be 0.17 or 17%. All these mathematical things are equivalent. So that means, what are we saying in simple English? That the odds of dying in the intervention arm are 17% of the odds of dying in the control arm. Same data set. Now we're going to look at risk differences. So we have already calculated this. The risk in the intervention arm was 10% or 0.1. Risk in the control arm was 40% or 0.4. So the absolute risk difference, or in other words, just the risk difference, is 10% minus 40%, which is 0.1 minus 0.4, which is 30% or 0.3. They're all the same, right? 30%, 0.3, minus 1, minus 0.4, they're all the same thing. In plain English, it means there is a 30% less risk of dying. That means arithmetically less risk of dying in the intervention arm compared to the control arm. When we say absolute risk difference is 30%, we are saying 30% less risk of dying in intervention arm compared to control arm. What is number needed to treat? I had told you it is 1 upon the absolute risk difference. That means 1 upon 0.3, which is the same thing as saying 100% divided by 30%, or 100 by 30, which is 0.33, which you normally round off to the upper integer, the closest upper integer. So for every 3.3 patients, say rounded off to 4. So that means for every 4 patients that I treat with the intervention compared to a similar number treated with control, that means every 4 interventions compared to 4 controls, 1 extra patient will survive in the intervention arm. That is the meaning of number needed to treat of 4. That means for every 4 I treat in the intervention, compared to 4 I treat in the control, 1 extra patient is going to survive in the intervention arm. And that I got from 1 divided by risk difference. So you had seen that number needed to treat was out here I showed you 100 by 30, right? 100 by 30 meant what? That 30 extra patients are surviving for every 100 being treated with the intervention compared to the control. So even from there we can easily surmise that 1 extra patient will survive for every 3.3 treated with the intervention compared to control, because 30 was surviving for every 100 being treated with the intervention compared to control. So I hope this clarifies the meanings of risk ratio, odds ratio, risk, odds, risk difference, relative risk reduction, and number needed to treat in simple English without getting into the jargon of statistics. The last point that I want to make is that odds ratio and risk ratios, being ratios, are not appropriate for an arithmetic scale. They are more appropriate for a log scale. And let me tell you how. Look, suppose the risk ratio is 2. That is the exact reverse of the risk ratio being 0.5, right? Because a risk ratio of 2 means that the risk has doubled. A risk ratio of 0.5 means the risk has halved. So these are exact mirror images of each other. A risk ratio of 5 is the mirror image of a risk ratio of 0.2, because 5 means 5 times increased risk, 0.2 means 5 times decreased risk. And yet look, on an arithmetic scale, how disproportionately different they look away from the null value of 1. So 5 somehow on an arithmetic scale gives the impression that it's a huge increase in risk, very far away from 1. 0.2 doesn't look as convincing because its physical distance from 1 doesn't look as much. And that's because on the higher side of 1, from 1 to all the way up to infinity on the right side, is being represented by 1 to 0 on the lower side of 1. The reciprocal thing. So to avoid this thing, it is better to show these on a logarithmic scale. So arithmetic scale, it would have looked like this. On a logarithmic scale, the distances visually look proportionate. So 2 is just as far away from 1 as 0.5 on a log scale. And 10 looks as far away from 1 as 0.1 on a log scale. So 0.1 and 10 are mirror images of each other. So they look equidistant on a log scale. And this gives more correct representations of the magnitude of your risk ratios and odds ratios and the width of the confidence interval. It avoids the misleading visual appearance that you get on an arithmetic scale. So to sum up this talk, disease frequency is measured by incidence proportion of risk, incidence rate, point prevalence, and period prevalence. We had covered that in the beginning of the talk. Remember, the odds is the slice divided by the rest of the pizza. So every time you're going to have a pizza from now on, you're going to remember odds, risks, and you're going to remember this talk. Risk is the slice divided by the whole pizza. So the odds ratio is the odds in one group divided by the odds in the other group. Risk ratio is the risk in one group divided by the risk in another group. When the events are rare, the odds ratio is almost equal to the risk ratio. Odds ratios always exaggerate the effect. They will always be further away from the value of 1 compared to the corresponding risk ratio. I've spent a lot of time explaining that odds ratios or risk ratios both can be used in randomized controlled trials or cohort studies, but only risk ratios or only odds ratios can be used in case control studies. Both odds ratios and risk ratios are better depicted on a log scale than an arithmetic scale. And a take-home point which I did not put in here was that number needed to treat is equal to 1 upon the risk difference. And what number needed to treat means is the number that you need to treat both in the intervention arm and the control arm to have at least one extra patient having a survival or a beneficial effect in the intervention arm. So with that, I end this talk. And I think we still have about 5 minutes for taking up questions. So I'll be happy to take up any questions that have come through chat or any live questions. Over to you, Aniket and Valentine.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. There has been quite a lot of questions on the initial few slides. So a few people want a re-explanation on incidence rate from that initial slides.
Yeah, so incidence rate is where you're taking the time factor into account. That means how long was each subject followed up during the period of observation. So remember that not everybody may be available for follow-up right from the start of the period of observation till the end. Supposing you are observing a bunch of 100 people, you plan to follow them up for 1 year. Okay, so 1 year has 12 months in it. So you would have ended up having 100 people contributing 12 months each, so 1200 months total. But supposing everyone does not follow up for 1 year, say some people followed up for only 6 months, say 50% of the people followed up for only 6 months, the remaining 50% for 1 year, then you would have had those 50 multiplied by only 6, right? Contributing 50 into 6 months, that's whatever, 300 months. The rest would have contributed full 12 months. So you're adding up all the months that everybody has contributed, that forms your denominator. And in that combined period of observation, the total number of cases that happened, that becomes your numerator. So suppose say there were 10 new cases of renal failure that occurred amongst these 100 people. So 10 would become your numerator. Your denominator would be 50 multiplied by 6 months plus the remaining 50 people multiplied by 12 months. They would have formed the denominator. Does that make it clear? The incidence rate?
I hope that should be clear. There are actually more questions related to that initial few slides, but we have more other important queries to answer. So Dr. Mayuri has asked, how will you account for the study dropouts and patients who died within the study period? I hope this will be covered by Dr. Narayan Prasad during the survival analysis part. So can we move on to the next question, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and there is a question from Abhishek Kumar. Is hazard ratio similar to odds ratio? And
okay. Hazard ratio is a term which is used in survival analysis. Hazard ratio tells, let's first talk about hazard and then we talk about hazard ratio. So hazard in one group is what are the chances of the event, say death, happening immediately in an extremely small span of time, considering that you have survived till that point of time. So supposing everyone is being followed up for a 12-month period at a given arbitrary point of time, say 6 months. Supposing you have survived till 6 months, what are your instantaneous chances of dying? That means in the very next hour or the very next day, what are your chances of dying? That is hazard. Okay. Hazard ratio is when there are two groups being compared. So you're taking the hazard in one group compared to the hazard in the other group. So obviously the hazard in any one group will be an extremely small figure, right? Your chances of immediately dying the very next moment is very tiny. But when you take a ratio of two groups, you get a meaningful figure, the hazard ratio. So if at any given point of time in one group, your chances of dying are smaller than the immediate chances of dying in the other group, then you are better off being a part of the first group than the second group. Because at any point of time, your chances of dying immediately are less than the chances of dying in the control group. So this is known as hazard ratio, and this is used in survival analysis when you're comparing two groups. And I think it will get covered if somebody is talking about survival analysis.
Dr. Narayan Prasad is talking on survival analysis at a later date. So there are quite a lot of questions.
It will get covered in that. It will get covered in that.
I'm doing a little bit of selection here.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
like the other question is, in studies where both can be used, what determines whether to use relative risk or odds ratio? I hope probably we are having another session on case control and cohort studies. So part of it will be covered during that time.
Yeah,
so, sir, would you like to?
I would like to take it because it's a question that invariably comes up in every research methodology. When to use odds ratio, risk ratio? So let's put one thing aside. In a case control study, you have no choice. You use only odds ratio. So that's a no-brainer. Issue is in a randomized control trial or cohort study, when you have a choice, which of the two to use, which one to use. The risk ratio is comes more intuitively to clinicians. We are more accustomed to dealing with risks than odds, and it's also easier for clinicians to explain to patients when they have to convey in terms of risk rather than odds. Because odds, after all, is a bit of an odd character, where you're dividing it by the rest who don't have the event. So it's more intuitive. Having said that, if you plan to do a multivariate analysis at the end of your study in a randomized control trial or a cohort study, a multivariate logistic regression, then you are probably better off calculating the odds ratios rather than the risk ratios. Why is that so? Because in a multivariate logistic regression, the output comes only as adjusted odds ratios. You don't get risk ratios in a multivariate logistic regression. So if your ultimate aim is to show both an unadjusted ratio as well as an adjusted ratio and compare them, the effect of doing a multivariate analysis, then you are probably better off doing an odds ratio rather than a risk ratio. If you don't have plans of a multivariate logistic regression, then it's entirely your choice. If you're more comfortable expressing it as risk ratios, go ahead and express it as risk ratios. If you want to express as odds ratios, express as odd ratios. They are both equivalent from that point of view. So this is my take on it.
So there was another question on odds ratio versus adjusted odds ratio. So I hope actually you have already covered that.
I've covered, yeah.
And then there's a question from Dr. Ravindra Prabhu. At what event rate odds ratio diverges from the risk ratio?
Oh, there is no such cutoff figure as you have seen when we were dealing with, kind of 5% to 10% event rates. Our odds ratios were pretty much like our risk ratios. The risk ratio was 0.5, the odds ratio was 0.47. There wasn't much of a difference to really talk about. So that's what I would say, ballpark figure of something or event rate of maybe less than 5 or 10%, you are quite okay interchangeably using the two.
And there has been quite a lot of requests to re-explain certain concepts, but I think actually rather than spending time now, this video recording will be available in ISN website. I would request the participants to go through the slides again at that time. And Parag Bhavaskar is asking how to calculate the number needed to harm.
Yeah, so it is exactly the same as number needed to treat. So in number needed to harm, is basically an outcome that is different. So you are looking at an adverse effect of your intervention, not the beneficial effect of the intervention. So the risk of adverse effect of the intervention in the intervention arm minus the adverse effects in the control arm, that becomes the risk difference. 1 upon that becomes the number needed to harm. That means how many subjects you need to treat in the intervention and the control groups to have at least one extra person being harmed by your intervention is the number needed to harm. So somebody has asked a question, does a lower number needed to treat means better is the intervention? Yes. The smaller your NNT, better is the intervention. That means the less number of patients you need to treat to have at least one extra patient who is benefiting from your treatment. So a number needed to treat of 3 is better than a number needed to treat of 10.
And there has been some confusion regarding relative risk. Dr. Atul already has explained, like people were confused whether relative risk
It's the same
risk
thing.
ratio are the same. Okay, so that has already been answered.
Unfortunately, both go by the same acronym of RR. So RR stands for both relative risk and risk ratio, exactly the same thing.
Then there is another question on numbers needed to treat. Does it mean that the lesser the number of NNT, the better the intervention?
Yeah, that's what I just answered. Yes, the lesser the NNT, better is the intervention.
And
that
this is going to, sorry, sir.
Yeah, so that means the fewer patients you treat with whom you get one extra patient who's surviving, the better it is. So a drug which has an NNT of 3 means only for every 3 patients you're treating, one extra person is surviving, compared to say a drug which has an NNT of 20. That means you need to treat 20 people to get that one extra benefit. So obviously I would go for the drug which has an NNT of 3 rather than an NNT of 20.
And this was a private question addressed to me, but I think actually it is better to discuss in the common forum without revealing the name of the person. What is your target NNT in an RCT?
No, there is no such thing as a target NNT. Basically, your NNT should always be lower than your NNH, number needed to harm. Obviously, you don't want more harms occurring for a given number of patients who are being treated compared to the benefits. Secondly, it also depends upon the cost of the treatment. So, for example, if I am going to be using a very, very cheap treatment, like say dexamethasone in severe COVID pneumonia, which is widely available, I am willing to live with a higher NNT. I'm willing to overtreat a certain number in order to benefit one extra patient simply because this treatment is so easily available. Suppose I'm looking at tocilizumab, a very expensive monoclonal antibody. Now, I would want a smaller NNT because I can't afford to treat some 50 people to get one extra survival for such an expensive and difficult to procure medication. Okay, so there are a lot of factors that going into deciding what is the NNT that is required. So there is no one number, but having said that, the smaller the better. And for a cheap, widely available intervention that has very few side effects, I am willing to accept a larger NNT because I can then treat many people on a mass scale. And even if I have one benefit occurring every 20 patients, it is fine with me.
And this is going to be the last question from Srinidhi Nathani. NNT should be more than NNH.
No, it should be less than the NNH. It's the other way around. See, the smaller the NNT, the better is the treatment. The bigger the NNH, the better is the treatment. That means large number of people have been giving the treatment for one extra harm. So you want big NNH and small NNT.
Okay, that was all. So the other question, there's one more question now. I think actually we will deal it while discussing.
I think in the RCT will get covered.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you, sir, for a very lucid presentation.
Thank you very much, Priyamvada. It was a pleasure.